He thought humiliating a black waitress would entertain the room, but when she touched the piano, every voice fell silent, and one man's ego shattered forever. The soft glow of crystal chandeliers spilled across polished marble floors as La Fontaine restaurant came alive for the evening. Nestled in the heart of Raleigh, North Carolina, it was the kind of place where money whispered instead of shouted, where tailored suits, silk dresses, and quiet confidence filled the air. Wine glasses clinked gently. Cutlery sang against porcelain. Somewhere in the corner, a grand piano sat beneath a pool of warm light, its glossy black surface reflecting the elegance of the room. Most people barely noticed it. Most people barely noticed her either. Deborah Miles moved swiftly between tables, her posture straight, her movements efficient. At 25, she had mastered the art of being invisible, present enough to serve, quiet enough not to interrupt. Her uniform was crisp, her smile polite, her voice calm. But behind her eyes lived something far louder. Music. It pulsed in her chest like a second heartbeat. Deborah had learned early in life how to survive without being seen. Growing up in a small town in South Carolina, she learned that dreams were luxuries, not guarantees. Her mother, Clara Miles, worked double shifts as a nurse, coming home exhausted but never empty-handed. Somehow, there was always dinner. Somehow, there was always warmth. And somehow, there was always music. Their piano had been old, its keys yellowed, some chipped, its sound slightly off. But to Deborah, it was sacred. While other children played outside, she sat on a worn wooden bench, teaching herself melodies by ear. She learned joy from gospel hymns and sorrow from blues, records her mother played late at night. The piano listened when no one else did. By 16, Deborah could play anything she heard. Church leaders noticed. Teachers encouraged her. Neighbors whispered about her gift. But gifts don't erase bills. Scholarships fell through. Responsibilities piled up. Dreams were folded carefully and placed on a shelf labeled later. Later became years. La Fontaine wasn't just a job. It was a compromise. The pay was decent, the environment refined, and most importantly, there was a piano. Even if she rarely touched it, knowing it was there felt like staying close to a part of herself she refused to bury. Tonight, however, something was about to change. The restaurant doors opened sharply, cutting through the gentle hum of conversation. Heads turned. Leonard Grayson entered like a man accustomed to gravity, bending in his favor. He was wealth personified. Tailored jacket, expensive watch, confident stride. He didn't look around to admire the space. He looked around to be admired. Behind him followed 3 companions, polished and eager, laughing before he finished his jokes. The staff stiffened instantly. Leonard Grayson was known, a self-made millionaire, a ruthless entrepreneur, and a man who enjoyed reminding others of where they stood beneath him. Deborah noticed him the moment he walked in, not because of who he was, but because of how the room reacted. Conversations softened. Servers straightened their backs. Managers hovered closer. She exhaled quietly. Just another table, she told herself. But Leonard had already noticed her. His eyes followed her movements. Efficient, graceful, unassuming. Something about her unsettled him, not because she stood out, because she didn't try to. As Deborah approached to take his order, Leonard leaned back in his chair, already smirking. "Scotch?" he said loudly. "Top shelf, and make it quick." Deborah nodded, professional and composed. "And what's your name?" Leonard asked, eyes flicking to her badge. "Deborah." He rolled the name around his tongue like a thought he hadn't finished yet. "Deborah," he repeated. "Sounds like someone with secrets." Her smile tightened slightly. "I'll be right back with your drink." As she walked away, Leonard leaned toward his companions. "Watch this," he murmured. He wasn't there for dinner. He was there for entertainment. As the night progressed, Leonard's table grew louder. He told exaggerated stories of deals closed, people crushed, competitors humiliated. His laughter carried across the room, sharp and deliberate. Deborah kept her distance, focusing on her other tables, but Leonard made sure she couldn't ignore him for long. "So tell me," he said as she refilled his glass, "what does a girl like you do when she's not serving people like me?" The question wasn't curiosity, it was bait. Deborah hesitated. "I play piano," she said quietly. The reaction was immediate. Leonard's eyes lit up, not with interest, but opportunity. "A pianist?" he said loudly. "Now that's rich," his companions laughed. "There's a piano right there," Leonard continued, pointing dramatically. "Why don't you give us a show?" The room shifted. Deborah's chest tightened. "I'm working," she replied carefully. "I can't—" "Oh, come on," Leonard interrupted. "Don't be shy. Unless—" he paused, smiling cruelly. "Unless you were exaggerating." Silence stretched. Eyes turned. Deborah felt every gaze like a weight pressing her down. "I really shouldn't," she said, her voice shaking despite her effort. Leonard leaned back, satisfied. "Figures," he said. "All talk, no talent." Something snapped, not loudly, not violently, but deeply. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Never let anyone make you feel small." Deborah looked at the piano, then back at Leonard. "Fine," she said softly. "I'll play." The walk to the piano felt longer than it actually was. Each step Deborah took echoed inside her chest, like a drumbeat of doubt and resolve. The soft murmur of the restaurant faded behind her, replaced by the sound of her own breathing. She could feel the eyes of the room following her, curious, skeptical, expectant. This wasn't how she had imagined playing again, not under a spotlight forced by mockery, not with arrogance hovering behind her like a storm cloud. Her palms were damp as she reached the bench. The piano gleamed under the chandelier, flawless and imposing. This wasn't the chipped upright she'd grown up with. This instrument demanded confidence. It demanded truth. Deborah hesitated. For a brief moment, fear whispered its familiar lies. "You don't belong here. You'll embarrass yourself. This isn't your place." Behind her, Leonard Grayson leaned back comfortably, sipping his scotch, already amused. To him, this was just another game, another chance to remind someone of their place. Deborah closed her eyes. She thought of her mother coming home exhausted but smiling anyway. She thought of nights practicing alone, fingers aching, dreams quietly burning. She thought of every time she had swallowed her voice to survive. Her fingers touched the keys. Cool, smooth, real. The room held its breath. The first note was barely louder than a whisper. A few diners shifted impatiently. Someone coughed. Somewhere, silverware clinked. Deborah almost stopped. Then she played the second note, and the third. Slowly, carefully, she let the melody unfold, not rushing it, not forcing it. She chose a piece born of longing and resilience, a composition that carried sorrow in one hand and hope in the other. Her hands trembled at first, but muscle memory took over. Years of practice rose to the surface, steadying her rhythm. The piano responded. The sound grew fuller, warmer. Conversations faded. Forks paused midair. The music wasn't flashy. It wasn't meant to impress. It was honest. Deborah poured herself into every chord, the weight of responsibility she'd carried too young, the loneliness of deferred dreams, the quiet strength she'd built, surviving in a world that never made space for her. The piano sang, not for Leonard, not for the crowd, for her. As the melody deepened, something shifted in the room. A woman at a nearby table wiped her eyes. A man leaned back, stunned. Servers froze in place, trays forgotten. Leonard stopped smiling. His glass hovered halfway to his lips as confusion crept across his face. This wasn't what he expected. This wasn't a joke. This was power, the kind he didn't own. The music swelled. Deborah's fingers moved with growing confidence, weaving complexity and emotion together. Every note carried intention. Every pause carried meaning. She wasn't just playing notes. She was telling a story of being overlooked, a story of survival, a story of refusing to be small. The restaurant was completely silent now. No laughter, no whispers, no clinking glasses, just music. Leonard shifted uncomfortably in his chair. For the first time in years, he wasn't in control of the room. He glanced around, realizing everyone was watching her, not him. The admiration in their faces felt foreign, unsettling. His companions sat stiffly, unsure how to react. The final movement began softly, almost fragile, then built into something bold and unshakable. Deborah leaned into the last chord, letting it ring. The sound lingered in the air. Then silence. For one heartbeat, two. Then the room erupted. Applause thundered from every corner. Chairs scraped back as people stood, clapping, cheering. Some whistled. Others simply stared, overwhelmed. Deborah remained seated, stunned. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't played for applause. Her chest tightened as emotion rushed in. Tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them away, standing slowly. She turned. Leonard Grayson was clapping too. Slowly, stiffly. The smirk was gone. In its place was something dangerously close to discomfort. "Well," he said, forcing a laugh, "that was unexpected." The word landed hollow. Deborah met his gaze calmly. "Music has a way of doing that," she said. The room hummed with unspoken agreement. Leonard cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how small his voice sounded. "You've made your point," he muttered. Deborah shook her head gently. "It was never about you." The silence that followed was heavier than the applause. Leonard had no comeback. For the first time, his wealth, status, and arrogance failed him completely. Deborah stepped away from the piano, her posture different now, stronger, grounded. She wasn't invisible anymore, and she didn't need permission to exist. Applause eventually fades, but what replaces it often matters more. As the restaurant slowly returned to motion, the energy was no longer the same. Conversations resumed, but softer now, reverent. People spoke differently, as if something sacred had passed through the room. Deborah returned to her station. Her hands still trembled, not from fear this time, but from release. Colleagues approached her quietly. "I didn't know you could play like that," one whispered, eyes shining. "You just changed the whole room," another said. Deborah smiled politely, but inside she felt unsteady, not overwhelmed by praise, overwhelmed by possibility. For years, music had been something she protected in private, afraid the world would reject it the way it had rejected her circumstances. Tonight, the world hadn't rejected her. It had listened. Leonard Grayson's table sat in awkward silence. No jokes, no laughter, no dominance. When Deborah approached with the check, Leonard barely met her eyes. "You didn't have to embarrass me," he muttered. Deborah paused, choosing her words carefully. "I didn't embarrass you," she said calmly. "I just stopped shrinking." Leonard said nothing. His companions paid quickly, left a generous tip, and exited without their usual grandiosity. No dramatic goodbye, no commanding presence, just retreat. The man who had tried to humiliate her had been undone by his own arrogance, and Deborah felt no triumph, only clarity. 3 days later, Deborah's phone rang while she was practicing in her small apartment. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "Hello? Deborah Williams?" a male voice asked. "Yes. My name is Marcus Hale. I was dining at La Fontaine Friday night. I'm a music producer based in Nashville." Silence filled the room. "I didn't want to interrupt you that evening," he continued. "But what you played? It wasn't performance. It was truth." Deborah sat down slowly. "I'm not offering you fame," Marcus said carefully, "and I'm not promising miracles, but I'd like to record a demo with you. No contracts, no pressure, just a chance." Deborah closed her eyes. For years, she had begged doors to open. Now, one stood open quietly, respectfully. "Yes," she whispered. Weeks passed. Deborah continued working at the restaurant, but something had changed. She walked differently, spoke differently, lived differently. She practiced relentlessly, not out of fear, out of belief. She recorded her demo in a modest studio. No glamour, no illusion, just a piano and her truth. The producer didn't interrupt, didn't correct, didn't rush her. When she finished, he simply said, "You're ready." Meanwhile, Leonard Grayson never returned to La Fontaine. Some said he sold one of his companies shortly after. Others said nothing at all. But Deborah no longer measured her worth by his reaction or anyone else's. She had learned something deeper. Power that demands attention is fragile. Power that earns respect is unshakable. Deborah's story isn't about a piano. It's about what happens when someone tries to reduce you to your uniform, your job, your background. It's about what happens when you stop asking for permission to be who you are. The world is full of people like Leonard Grayson, loud, confident, dismissive. They mistake dominance for strength, but real strength is quiet. It's built in long nights, in unseen sacrifices, in talents nurtured without applause. Deborah didn't win because she embarrassed a millionaire. She won because she refused to disappear. Moral of the story: never let someone else decide your worth. Your gift does not need validation from power. Power bends when truth speaks. You don't need to shout. You don't need to prove. You just need to show up as who you are. Because when talent meets courage, even the loudest egos fall silent. If this story moved you, even a little, subscribe to Momentum Stories. Here, we don't celebrate privilege. We celebrate resilience. We tell the stories the world almost missed. If Deborah's journey reminded you of your own dream, don't bury it. Play it. Speak it. Live it. And remember, the moment you stop shrinking is the moment the world starts listening.